My stepdad is unhealthily obsessed with bottlenose dolphins, and I just learnt the terrifying reason why Kevin has been my stepfather since marrying my mother in 2024. Mom met him in 2022, 2 years after Dad passed away. Kevin was a godsend, truth be told. Stereotypically, stepfathers are loathsome, right? Comically villainous? Well, I was kind of hoping for that, so I'd have a reason to dislike him. Frustratingly, however, I found that I really didn't hate the guy, and I was a grouchy 15-year-old whose grief was only just starting to dim, so all of the ingredients were there. I should have hated my stepdad, but I didn't. Kevin was nice. Kevin was perfect. It took until spring of this year for that illusion to slip, for me to learn of my stepfather's special interest, bottlenose dolphins. I was relieved, initially, to learn of his little quirk. I was surprised that it had taken 3 years for Kevin's oddness to come to light, but I was simply glad to finally have evidence of an abnormality. Having some sort of flaw made him seem, in my eyes, more human. I was wrong. Shortly before starting university last September, Kevin took me fishing, despite my gentle reminder that I don't really like the activity that much. Ironically, my older sister, Becky, was keener to give it a whirl, but Kevin called it an opportunity for male bonding. That whole thing rubbed her the wrong way. I, on the other hand, was more than happy to add misogyny to the list of my stepfather's imperfections. Why was I so gleeful about finding something wrong with Kevin? Did I always know, deep down, that he wasn't quite right? And if so, did I just want a tame explanation for that churning feeling in my gut? Something that didn't scare me? Peaceful out here, isn't it, Craig? Kevin said as we both dangled our rods into the water. I shrugged. Sure, don't worry, he chuckled. You'll be at university soon. Clubbing, drinking, making mistakes. You'll be away from your boring dad. Is it okay if I call myself that? I stifled a frustrated sigh. You always ask me that, and the answer is always, yes. I know, but you still refuse to use the word, said Kevin, and that makes me sad. I awkwardly tried to change the topic. So, why do you love fishing so much? My stepfather's face lit up. Nature, Craig. It's a beautiful thing. Terrible sometimes, but beautiful. Perfectly balanced. Perfectly designed. Do you want to know my favorite animal in the world? It was an odd question. Something a child might ask. His giddy tone was quite childlike, too. Still, I nodded. The bottlenose dolphin, Kevin whispered, looking longingly at the water. That's why I convinced your mother to go on our lovely little Welsh getaway before you go to university. I want to see them swimming off the coast. God, I used to go every year, and it's been 3 now. I'm desperate, but this is nice. Really nice. Talking to you about the old bottlenose, I mean. I've spent the last 3 years chewing your mother's ear off about him, so it's refreshing to finally have a chance to tell somebody new. Oh, the bottlenose is my favorite animal. Maybe my favorite thing in the whole world. I struggled to contain a smirk at Kevin's impassioned rant. Given that this dolphin's so important to you, I'm surprised I've not heard you talk about it before. My stepfather sighed. A deep, sorrowful sigh. Well, not everybody understands, Craig. I've been vulnerable in the past, opened up about my passion, shared this side of myself, and, many times, I've been burnt. I snorted with laughter, but tried to play it off as a cough. However, Kevin fell silent after that, and it wasn't a pleasant silence. There was contemplation, but it bubbled with rage. I could see my stepfather seething beneath his face's crumbling veneer of pleasantry. Anyhow, 1 week later, the four of us arrived at our Airbnb in Cardigan Bay, North Wales, whilst Mum and Kevin booked a boating excursion along the coast. I spilt the beans to Becky. "Prepare yourself," I said. "On our fishing trip, I learnt that Kevin's really into dolphins." "So am I," she replied. "No, he's really into them," I insisted with a grin. My sister lifted an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" I smirked and nodded my head at our stepfather, who was giddily bouncing from foot to foot, whilst he and Mum huddled together in front of the iPad. Becky smiled. "Well, that's kind of cute, isn't it?" I shook my head, trying to swallow the slight lump rising up my throat. Something about that day still didn't sit well with me. "I guess so. I mean, at first, I thought so, but he got weird about it. See, I made the mistake of laughing, and then I don't know. That's what he gets for choosing you over me." Becky giggled. "Male bonding isn't all it's cracked up to be, hey? I would have been sweet and understanding. I wouldn't have laughed at his dolphin boner." I brayed with laughter. "Please never say those words together again." "Why are you two chuckling?" asked Mum, as she and Kevin walked over to us in the kitchen. Becky silently mouthed "dolphin boner" to me, and I tried desperately to suppress my grin. "Nothing," I eventually managed to answer. "We're just excited for this boat trip." Our mother raised an eyebrow. "My 2 teenage children are excited to spend the day with us?" "Well, that's not suspicious at all." "Teenage? Becky's nearly 20, I pointed out. "She's old now. You're both fetuses to us." Mum sighed, scooping up her coat from the counter. "Now, shall we go for a little mooch around town before the sun scuttles away? We've got an hour before our booking." Kevin was distant whilst we wandered around the shops. His gaze belonged to the sea, which Becky had clocked too. We shared a few knowing grins, realizing that he was daydreaming about those bottlenose dolphins. And he ended up dragging us down to the dock about 10 minutes before our booking. "We're going to have the boat all to ourselves," whispered Kevin dreamily. "Well, not quite," came a voice from behind us. We turned to see a stout man with a gray, bushy beard waddling down the wooden pier towards us. "Dave!" Kevin roared jubilantly before embracing him. "That's Captain Dave to you," the man corrected, and the two laughed. Becky frowned. "You know him?" "They're old friends," Mum said. "That's how we got the boat all to ourselves." "Got yourselves a good discount too," Dave chuckled. "Some would think being friends for 30 years entitles a man to more than 30% off," Kevin quipped. Dave rolled his eyes. "Stop trying to bleed my dry, you bastard. Come on, folks. Hop on board." It was a beautiful day. That's one of the main things I remember. The sun beat down mercilessly, slow roasting us. I sat by the taffrail, letting the sea breeze cool me down a little, and that was when I saw it. A gray, shimmering fin, rising and falling rhythmically above and below the surface of the water. I opened my mouth to say something, but "Oh, it's beautiful!" yelled Kevin at the top of his lungs. "Kathy, do you see this?" "I see it," my mum chuckled from beside him. The two of them were cuddling beside me, watching as the creature danced alongside our boat, and I turned to look for my sister. She wasn't on the deck. "You need to get and fetch Becky," Kevin insisted. I nodded, but when I reached the entryway to the cabin, I found only Captain Dave standing behind the wheel. He nodded at me with the slightest smile, and I felt unnerved. I felt displaced. I felt just as I had on that fishing trip. "Where is she?" I asked. "Said she wanted a nap," Dave replied, nodding again, this time towards the door at his right, which led to quarters below deck. "Don't think she had much interest in the dolphins." I furrowed my brow and barged past the captain before throwing the door open. Down 4 steps, there was a cramped room, which contained a small table littered with takeaway boxes and a single bed at the back. Becky lay on it, chest rising and falling with the gentleness of the dolphin's fin. I managed to calm my breathing a little. "Bottlenose dolphins are special animals, Craig." The voice came from behind me, and I turned to see Kevin closing the door. "It's a little weird for my sister to be sleeping in the captain's bed, isn't it?" I asked. Kevin ignored me. "You're missing the dolphins, boy." Boy. He'd never called me that before, and there was a curtness to the tone. A bite. "Kevin, I don't care how well you know Dave. I don't want my sister to sleep down here," I said, before turning towards the bed and kneeling down. "Wake up, Becky. She's going to be resting for a while," Kevin whispered. Then came the click of the door locking, and I felt a pang of fear in my chest. Like nothing I've ever felt before, it was a blade that drove through my ribs, twisting tightly into my heart. I struggled to breathe, struggled to move, but I managed to twist my jittery, half-paralyzed body towards Kevin. I sat on the floor, back against the bed, forming a weak and flimsy barrier between the approaching man and my sister. "Mom," I weakly croaked, voice failing me. "Mom's sleeping too," he whispered. "But you're awake. You want to hear me talk about my favorite animal, don't you?" I tried to shake my head, but I was frozen in fear. I'd been telling myself for months that turning 18 meant I'd finally become an adult. However, in that moment, I was a boy, frightened and alone. "As I told you out on the lake, nature is a beautiful thing," Kevin continued, taking slow steps towards me. "It demands balance. We're part of that. You and me. Human beings. You know, there's so much to be learnt from the animals around us. Bottlenose dolphins are our greatest teachers. Now, it isn't just about their intelligence, their social hierarchy, their proclivity for aggression. No, they're related to us in another way. You see, they understand that cruelty serves a purpose, that nature bends to no rules, no ethical standards. Do you know what they do when eyeing a taken woman, Craig? A taken woman. Those words iced my body even more firmly to the spot, foreshadowed the horrifying revelation that I had already started to, in part, predict. I curled up tightly against the bed as Kevin took another step closer. "I'll tell you then," Kevin sighed. "Bottlenose dolphins commit infanticide as part of sexual selection. In other words, a male will kill a female's existing offspring in order to induce estrus, return her to heat, to a state of fertility. Then, he will mate with her and create fresh offspring. He will ascend to become the prime male, extinguishing the previous male's bloodline. Now, humans aren't dolphins. I'm no fool, Craig. But there is, I think, something to be learnt from the magnificent bottlenose. You see, much like them, our intelligence very nearly gets in the way of our baser instincts. But in the right circumstances, nature overrides our silly, emotional minds. And I've found, time and time again, that taking away a human mother's cubs reawakens something in her. That broodiness, that desperation to procreate, to protect the family line, to ensure the species' survival. It gives the male a chance to sire her next offspring. Of course, there will be immense grief, but out of that grief is born a new desire, a new purpose, and I will be there to to take the reins, to start a new family with your mother. I've been patient these past 5 years, but the time is right. I managed to splutter a few more words. Please, I don't understand. Kevin's face surveyed me neutrally, with thin lips and eyes dark and unfeeling. That was what your father said. My heart halted. The clamp had tightened, finally bringing it to a stop. What did you say? I hoarsely whispered. Kevin knelt down before me. There was only a yard or so between us. I saw you, your sister, and your mother, he softly explained. Saw the 3 of you visiting him in the hospital. Saw how happy the 4 of you were. A lovely little family. And I thought, why shouldn't I have that? So, I made it happen, Craig. He probably would have woken from the coma, given enough time. But I wasn't going to let that happen. My heart restarted, only to pound more furiously than ever as I stared into those terrifying eyes. Realized that this was no nightmare, that Kevin was not lying. My father hadn't died due to malfunctioning equipment, as the hospital had claimed. This monster had intervened, had planned to take my dad's family, had succeeded. I started to feel the life return to my limbs, to my hands. I started to move my right hand along the floor and wrapped it around the clunky, steel-toed boot lying on the floor. For what it's worth, I always liked you, Craig, Kevin promised. But we have to take notes from nature. I'll never be anything more than Catherine's provider until I clean the slate completely. Your father isn't gone yet. Not until you and Becky are gone. As Kevin's beady eyes glinted in the orange glow of the swinging bulb above, I sensed that he was moments from pouncing. So, I swung the toe end of the boot straight at Kevin's temple. He cried out and fell to the floor, massaging his wounded head. The boot hadn't been enough to put him down for good, but it had given me time to get to my feet. I leapt forwards and delivered a blow to his face, with one well-meaning kick, which sent the back of his skull clunking against the dining table's side leg. That left him still. I rushed up the stairs, unlocked the door, then burst into the captain's cabin. So, have you... Dave began. He stopped mid-sentence upon seeing not his friend, as he'd expected, but the teenage boy who, presumably, wasn't supposed to surface from below deck ever again. And lying silently on the seating by the taffrail was my mother. She had clearly been drugged too. The water bottles, I thought, realizing I'd turned down the offering from Captain Dave when we first got on the boat. He'd looked disgruntled about that. If I'd taken that bottle, Becky and I would have likely never woken up. Captain Dave eyed me for a moment, or it could have been several seconds, before flying towards me in a rage. I ducked and flew under his arms before running out onto the deck. I ran right up to the back of the boat, stopping at the rail. There was a trio of dolphins leaping out of the water behind our boat, which trundled slowly along the coast. When I turned, Dave was barreling towards me. He was far more heavy-set than me, and would have easily bested me in a fight if he'd slowed his roll, if he'd not charged towards me at such speed. I screamed as I threw myself to the side. The captain's arm caught me, but it was too late. Too much forward momentum. He fell off the back of the boat into the water. The vessel started to leave the man behind, slowly, given that we were pushing forwards at a crawl, and we drifted slightly to one side, wheel now unmanned. Meanwhile, trailing behind us, was the overboard captain, as he flailed about in the water, disrupting the dolphin's route. The animals stopped swimming and began to push their noses out of the water, began to release distressed trills. Then there came a clunking sound, and the engine cut out. I turned to see a heavily panting Kevin come out of the cabin, boat keys in hand. "Help me!" cried Captain Dave from about 20 yards behind our boat. "Get me away from these damn animals!" Kevin eyed me with rage, pointing the keys towards me. "You!" This time, I didn't have the element of surprise on my side, didn't have a weapon at hand. I wanted to jump overboard and swim to shore, swim for help. But I was terrified that this hellish man would hurt my sister, would take my mother away, never to be seen again. So, I tried to protect myself with arms over my face, but the hulking man quickly tore them away. I shrieked in terror as he put my neck in a stranglehold and pushed me over the edge of the taffrail, head dangling upside down over the back of the boat. I eyed the world from a topsy-turvy perspective. Captain Dave swam towards us, from my perspective, looking as if he might drop from the ocean above into the sky below. I could only hope he was closing the distance between him and the boat, and I knew that I had no chance of surviving an attack from those two men combined. But then I noticed those same 3 bottlenose dolphins. They were still squeaking and moaning irritably, clearly frustrated with the human who had disrupted their swim, and their fins were trailing after him. One of the animals suddenly pushed its face out of the water and lunged towards his arm. Captain Dave cried out in pain as the animal's teeth sank into his skin, and as he thrashed about in agony, blood staining the water, the other 2 bottlenoses joined their friend. That was what saved me. I was seconds from blacking out when Kevin's hands loosened on my neck. "Shit!" Kevin hissed. As I pulled my head back upright, I saw the man rummaging around in the cabin. Then he ran back across the deck with a deadly instrument in hand, a spear gun. "Don't move," my stepfather warned as he raised the weapon, "or I'll put one of these in you, and that'll ruin everything. Understand?" Before waiting for a response from me, Kevin fired a shot into the water. There followed a yelp of agony, and when I turned to look over the back rail, I saw the spear protruding from one dolphin's glistening skin. Its 2 companions began to release more agitated sounds like pierced my ears and filled my heart with primal dread. These were war cries. As the bloody Captain Dave attempted a one-armed front stroke towards the boat, one of the animals hissed aggressively. I've never heard such a terrifying sound. Before, they'd been attacking Captain Dave simply out of annoyance. This time, they were angry. One of the creatures disappeared underwater, and I saw the captain's fate before he did. But his eyes eventually widened as something took hold of his feet. He released a brief scream as the dolphin dragged him below the surface. "David!" Kevin yelled, loading the spear gun to attack the 3rd and final bottlenose. The dolphin floated alongside its limp and lifeless friend, which was bleeding out into the ocean. I believe that these creatures are incredibly intelligent. I felt its emotion, felt its sorrow as it looked upon its dead friend. Most terrifyingly of all, I felt the surviving dolphin's understanding. As it eyed my deranged stepfather, it knew that this man was responsible for its friend's death. Call it some instinctual reflex, but I shuffled away from the taffrail, crawled backwards on my behind across the deck, eyed by a scowling Kevin. "Don't even think about running away," the man growled, turning his back to the ocean and facing me spear gun. "When I'm finished with that thing, I'll..." A tremendous splash of water was followed by a gray shape that half blotted out the dazzling sun. Then, with a level of acrobatic accuracy that left me stunned into both awe and fear, the creature snapped its jaws onto the side of my stepfather's midsection. Kevin screeched in pain as he was dragged over the back rail and pulled below the depths of the ocean. Along with the captain, I released a guttural moan, not sure whether my terror came from the sheer power of those sea-dwelling animals or the insidiousness of my stepfather. Both, and I was too frightened to stand for a long while, too frightened that those mighty animals might return to the surface for me, might kill us all out of sheer aggression or the misplaced belief that we were culpable for their friend's death. Eventually, as the sun started to set and the boat drifted aimlessly along the coast, I heard the door creak open behind me. A drowsy Becky stumbled out, asking where the captain and Kevin had gone. I began to blubber inconsolably, unable to explain a thing to her, and she phoned the police from the boat. Mum came around shortly afterwards, and the Coast Guard came to rescue us within half an hour. Even after explaining everything to my distraught mother and sister, it doesn't feel real. Even after the police investigation found the mutilated, savaged corpses of Kevin and David on a beach 300 yards away, it didn't feel real. I didn't tell them what Kevin told me about Dad, that he killed him. That's my burden to bear. The rest of the horror is too much for them already. Kevin was right, though. Whether one looks at human beings or bottlenose dolphins, the fact remains the same. Nature is a beautiful thing. Beautiful and terrible. When I was in my early teens, I would ride my bicycle to Kmart to look and buy model cars and supplies. And that was my thing back then, building model cars. I can't say if I was in any real danger, as per the 2 on this sub, but basically I was stalked. And while I was deciding between the 66 Chevelle or the 85 Camaro, I saw this man, mid-30s, walk past the aisle that I was in. Then he passed the same aisle from the other end. Once I made up my mind, settled on the IR, and left the aisle. He was on the far end and started walking down the parallel aisle to me. I wasn't weirded out yet, but I made a detour down another aisle to ditch him, or so I thought. I doubled back and got to the main aisle that led toward the front, toward the registers. He popped out on another aisle, further up facing me, then turned down the next one, and each time I encountered him, he smiled, making eye contact. So I put the model down, turned 180 degrees, and headed back toward the back of the store. There was a service entrance back there, so I made for that, thinking that I had lost or confused him. I still wanted to build that Camaro, so I went back toward the front, and there he was, sitting on a bench in the lobby, still making eye contact, and still smiling, and waiting. At this point, the obvious answer would have been to just turn and bolt. But in an effort to keep my bike from getting stolen, I secured it to the railing inside the lobby, and I didn't want to stand still in his presence. I quickly went back into the store and zigzagged through the aisles, trying to lose him, and by now, I was sufficiently freaked out, but still didn't want to make a scene. Every time I made my way back out into the main aisle, there he was. I was walking at a brisk pace, and he was just casually strolling, but always in my direction. And at one point, I passed the sporting goods section, so I picked up a baseball bat and started carrying it, and I passed the main aisle on purpose. Now, showing him my weapon, he seemed to be unfazed, just casually making his way up and down the aisles, still smiling, still making eye contact. I was just short of running now, almost back into the service department, when he gave up the subterfuge of chance encounters. He was directly following me. He wasn't at my pace, but he managed to keep up, and I gave up. I tossed the bat and made for the service desk. And a relatively stout African-American man was there. And I said, "Hey, I think this guy throwing a thumb in his direction is following me. Can you call someone?" He hadn't come around the corner yet, so I never saw his reaction, but we heard a crash and heavy, fast footfalls. He had run toward the service entrance, knocking over a display on the way out. The service rider stood by with me while the police were called, and once they arrived, the police took a few statements, did a walk around. He was long gone, and then put my bike in their cruiser and drove me home. I didn't go back to Kmart on my own again until I was old enough to drive, and I still never went back for that model Camaro. I think the hide behind is real. I just don't think it's what we thought. They say the hide behind lives in the deep places of the forest, where light hesitates and the trees crowd so close their branches knit the sky shut. No one really knows what it looks like, because anyone who glimpses it never lives to speak. It moves soundlessly, just beyond the edges of vision. It follows from behind, always watching. Old woodsmen whispered that it feasted on fear itself, a creature that didn't merely kill you, but hollowed you out from the inside until your mind was just another branch to be snapped off the tree. I grew up scoffing at those stories, superstitions to scare children around campfires, until 2 weeks ago, when I inherited my grandfather's land in the northern Maine woods, and realized that some legends are born from truths too terrible to face. The truck's headlights cut a narrow beam through the pre-dawn fog as I rolled onto the overgrown logging road that led to Grandpa's property. He'd passed last fall, and the land, 400 acres of tangled pines and spruces, had fallen to me by default. I'd always dreaded I'd end up with it, a worthless patch of woods, untouched since Prohibition, where no sane soul ventured after dark. That morning, the air tasted of damp moss and decay. I hopped out, boots sinking into spongy undergrowth. In the weak glow of my headlamp, I surveyed the clearing where Grandpa's old cabin had stood, until a storm 2 years ago snapped its roof off like a matchstick. Now, only weeds and rotting floorboards remained. I hefted my gear, a chainsaw, an axe, marking flags, and a road map scrawled with half-melted notes Grandpa had left in a drawer. He'd written little about this place, just plots, trails, and the warning, stay on the high ground. Never follow the echo. I shrugged it off as Grandpa's eccentricity. After all, echoes don't come in forests. As I stepped into the trees, the world contracted to the circle of my beam. 1,000 pine needles whispered overhead, yet I could feel the silence hugging me, pressing close. An hour in, the work began smoothly. I cleared fallen limbs, stacked logs, planning a rough path through the glade. But every time I turned my back for a moment, something would shift. My orange tape markers vanished. A fallen branch I'd snapped in half, whole again, as if nothing had touched it. I'd stop, listening, and hear nothing but the silence. No birds, no rustle of small creatures. The forest held its breath as I worked. Then came the glimpses. Out of the corner of my eye, something flickering, darker than shadow, darting between trunks. Too tall to be a deer, too slender for a bear, always just out of focus. When I spun around, nothing remained but moss and gloom. By noon, My stomach knotted. I'd dropped my wrench against a stump, and when I turned, it was gone. I hunted within a 3-meter radius. Nothing. No footprints in the damp forest floor. No sign the tool had been anywhere but exactly where I left it. A sudden gust of wind rattled the pines. I gripped my headlamp tighter. The high notes of the branches sounded almost wrong, like a warning cry. I shook my head and pressed on, aware that the forest felt less like home and more like an organism watching my every move. Late afternoon light slanted low when I reached a hollow I'd never noticed. There, half hidden by leaning black pines, sat a shack. Its wood boards were bleached to ash. Windows yawned empty, and the door hung loose on its hinges. No chimney, no sign on any map. Nothing but rot and stillness. I hesitated at the threshold. My tools, my map, all my plans felt trivial next to this thing. A dare welled in my chest. Go on. Step inside. I unsnapped my belt holster, let the radio clatter to the floor. Only the hush answered. Inside, the air was colder than outside. Swirls of dust motes drifted in feeble shafts of dying sunlight. At the center lay a mound of bones, twisted, broken. Some human, some animal, fused into a grotesque puzzle under a thin layer of mold. The walls bore carvings, hundreds of gouged symbols, not words, but eye shapes, dull hollows that seemed to follow me, perched above splintered boards, like vultures waiting for carrion. I felt my pulse hammer, checked my phone, no signal. On a rickety table in the corner lay a leather-bound journal, half covered in pine needles. I flipped it open. The entries were Grandpa's handwriting, neat at first, then scrawling madly. June 3rd. Footprints appear at dawn. Small, slanted. Behavior is odd. The trees, they lean. June 10th. Voices in the walls. Mother thinks I've lost it. June 12th. I saw it. Tall, jointed limbs. No face. Just skin drawn tight. It breathes the dark. My throat went dry. I stuffed the journal into my pack and backed out of the shack. A low creak made me whirl, but the door had swung closed on its own. The sun was a bleeding orb on the horizon when I sprinted to my truck. Behind me, the forest sighed like a dozen lungs. I dared not look back, but every few steps I felt the air grow colder, as though something exhaled just behind me. I slammed inside, locked the doors. The world beyond the windshield shimmered in the dying light. Trees danced at the corner of vision. I fumbled the keys and peeled out, tires spinning on gravel. That night, in a motel just off Route 1, sleep was a twisted labyrinth. Waking bursts of panic. Imagine footsteps on the vinyl floor, shadow figures pressed against the window. In the mirror across the room, I thought I saw a tall shape leaning in, watching. I blinked. It was gone. At dawn, I thought, it's over. I tell myself those stories were real, but maybe they've stayed behind in the forest. Back in my own house, the hide behind did not release me. Doors I'd locked creaked open in the night. Objects moved, 1 minute on the mantel, the next in the hallway. My phone buzzed with static, slicing at my nerves. In the bathroom, I stared into the mirror. My reflection seemed delayed, like a broken video feed. I snapped my fingers and watched the mirror still. A figure crouched behind me, slender limbs splayed, ribs paling under the skin. I whirled, but nothing stood there. Lights flickered. The thermostat climbed past 70. I knew I should leave, drive away. But something in me rooted me like the trees of that forest, immobile. By the third day, I was skittering at shadows. I woke to hear breathing through the vent above my bed. low, wet rasping, like lungs learning to imitate human sound. I lay frozen, sweating in the dark, until I realized the breathing was echoing my own heartbeat. The journal pages had begun to slip from my mind like soggy paper. In my own handwriting, I found scrawled notes. It's here. It knows I know. But I couldn't remember writing them. My phone filled with photos I didn't take. Each one showed my living room, but with something bent and crouching where light shouldn't reach. I'd swipe the screen to enlarge, only to see empty rooms. I could no longer trust sight, sound, or memory. Clocks ran backward, hallways stretched impossibly long. The floor dipped beneath my feet, as though the house itself were breathing. Neighbors knocked, and I didn't answer. Emails piled up, unanswered. Once a delivery man left a package at my door. I opened it to find a single carved eye, made of bone. I screamed, but the walls drank the sound. The only solution left was destruction. If the hide behind was tied to places, trees, boards, walls, I would burn it out. In the dead of night, I poured gasoline through every crack of my house. My hands shook so violently, I doused the driveway too. I stood at the front, lighter in hand, and the forest beyond the clearing pressed in, shadow shifting like hungry mouths. I clicked the lighter. The flame guttered, then roared. A line of fire bloomed across the floorboards. Flames licked the walls, crackling with fury. The house became a living thing, screaming in heat and smoke. Outside, I barely register the shriek. Many shrieks, like human voices torn through fire. I tripped over my own feet and staggered toward the truck. Through the orange haze, I thought I saw shapes, tall and twisted, crawling within the walls of flame. They writhed against the heat, pressing like insects in a magnifying glass. Their eyeless faces turned toward me in silent accusation. I drove away as the roof collapsed in a thunder of burning timber. The woods behind me glowed red, sparks dancing into the moonlit sky. I parked by the roadside under a flickering street lamp. For a moment, I believed the fire had purged the evil, but the light buzzed sickly, dipping in brightness. The breathing returned, subtler now, but everywhere, beneath the truck seat, in the rustle of plastic bags in the bed, in the engine's idling pulse. I peered out the windshield. Standing at the edge of the tree line, as still as a gravestone, was a tall shape. No face, skin drawn tight over empty sockets. It cocked its head, as though curious. Then it strode forward, limbs bending at impossible angles, into the ring of streetlight. I ducked. My heart thundered. In the rearview mirror, I caught its reflection, and it smiled with teeth too many to be human.